All right, peace, y'all. It is I, the EMA, Energy Master Allah, and you are watching 5% Nation, the Solar Return. This is episode 9, and we are getting into Lost Found Muslim lessons number 2. So we did number 1 yesterday, aka the 1 to 14. And today we'll be diving into the 1 to 40. So I have decided to break this up into 4 even parts, 10 degrees each, because these are some heavy degrees. So everything that has been in the previous episodes kind of helps you build up toward this right here. So you've got some supreme alphabet under your belt, some supreme mathematics under your belt, and that allows you to grab some of the further nuance and the other layers that are beneath the surface of the lessons themselves. And so what I'll do, like I have been doing, is going through these. We want to see what claims we can validate, or we want to look through the lens of whether something is intended to be taken literal, or is it trying to bring our attention to some other, mathematical truth or things of this nature. Just taking a tour of the technology of these lessons. Once again, you don't have to necessarily believe in anything in order to understand the system and find something of value for yourself. If you don't have that leopard in the mirror, time is running out, because the next series will be based on how these lessons apply to my book. It is in canticle style. At some point, I'm going to be having a conversation with you about Dante's Divine Comedy, because your entire society is essentially run based on principles that are found in there in poem form. So if you don't know how to translate and be able to distill the knowledge out of these types of writings or whatever, then you pretty much just, up the creek. But all right, without further ado, so we don't waste too much time, let's get into it. This is the 1 to 40, aka the meat. Yesterday you had the veggies. Now you get to eat your meat. Y'all remember that? Soylent Green is people. How can you have pudding if you don't eat your meat? Like, I was hella young when that movie came out. I'm trying to think if I was even born. Like, did I just see it because it was still playing, like, on TV and stuff, like, after I was born, or was I actually born? But if you're from the 70s and all of that, you definitely know. But I was born tail end of the 80s, so I'm just right on the border. All right, so the first degree, I'll go ahead and write this out. This is a very important degree, and it's very central to a lot of things that I talk about. And actually, I don't think I want to write it out, because I want some space in order to do some work and capture some of what's in here and demonstrate it for you. All right, so the first degree says, who made the Holy Quran or Bible? How long ago? And will you tell us, why does Islam renew its history every 25,000 years? Answer. The Holy Quran or Bible was made by the original man, who is Allah, the supreme being, black man of Asia. The Quran will expire in the year 25,000, 9,080 years from the date of this writing. The Nation of Islam is all wise and does everything right and exact. The planet Earth, which is the home of Islam, is approximately 25,000 miles in circumference. So the wise man of the East, the black man, makes his history to equal his home in circumference, a year to every mile. Thus, every time his history lasts 25,000 years, he renews it for another 25,000 years. Okay, so there are elements of what's being said that are quite literal, and there are elements within that have some profound layers. And in fact, there was something in here that I found that, I presented to, one of the guys, Divine Allah, Divine Master Allah, out there in Texas. And, he's one of the first guys I had the opportunity to build with when I got Knowledge of Self back in 2019. He's mutual friend of my guy Stone Mecca. If you don't know who Stone Mecca is, he is a music director for stage shows and things that RZA does. And that's my bro right there. He also did some work with George Clinton back in the day, like I did. So that was one of the things we connected on. But anyways, let's go ahead and dig into some of the stuff. So let's look at the question itself. Okay, so number one, just so you know where we're at. Okay. All right, so we asked this question: who made the Holy Quran or Bible? The way that is asked assumes that the Holy Quran and the Bible are the same thing. This goes back to a very old teaching that is found in virtually every major religion, be it Judaism, well, all the Abrahamic ones. So that's Judaism mainly, Christianity, and Islam are the big three. You got other stuff in there like Mondaism. You've got a few different things that evolved alongside these within that same sphere. But as for the big three, as well as Hinduism, which is largely rooted in the Hindu Vedas, which simply means knowledge, is understood that all this information came from a like source that was written by the Supreme Being in a hidden or vibratory form before it was ever written down in a physical form. And so whether it be sages or prophets or seers or whatever name you want to put on these people, these were the individuals that, tapped into this and recorded it. And so you basically had traditions that were far apart, that modern academia swears didn't have contact with each other, and yet and still they all came to very similar conclusions because they were all tapping into the exact same math. Remember, Islam is mathematics, and so they were all tapping into the same mathematics, the same astronomy, the same system. And it doesn't really make sense to try to reinvent the wheel. So these people, they did exchange notes, and they did build with each other, and they did have major centers of education where people could come and they could become well versed in world studies, not just the studies of their own, local society, but global society. And then global society was largely concentrated, in a relatively smaller area than what we consider to be the global society of today. But that just goes to show you that it was so embedded within these cultures that as they spread out, naturally they would have taken this central type of understanding. And so the creation of the Quran and the early transition from pre-Islamic Arabic sciences into mainstream Islam in the early 7th century, it involved a very stringent process of bringing together as much of the math and as much of the existing teachings of the time, including both Judaism and Christianity, as well as Hindu concepts. Because the Arabs worked alongside the Hindus in order to pin down what would be the universal numeral system. So the numerals that we use now, 1 through 9 is 0. The way that they look, the way that they operate was part of a large collaborative effort. And so everybody was on this same program. All right. Says, how long ago? We got some times that are given to us. And asks, and will you tell us, why does Islam renew its history every 25,000 years? So this idea of renewal. So we often just look at this stuff as, okay, somebody wrote this one thing down. It was a hard historical account and blah blah blah. No, this, as the degree says, Well, I don't. It doesn't necessarily say it here, but then this is something that we commonly say is that the original man writes his history ahead of time. All right. That means that he determines a particular path, and like I like to say, creates a meme packet, so the different symbols and the different knowledge that'll basically be guiding how things unfold over the 25,000 cycle. Key operative word being cycle, meaning that this comes back around. So the same thing is happening with a different face on it every 25,000 years. All right. Just like your girl's menstrual cycle comes around once a week every month, there's cycles of the planet that happen every 25,000 years. All right. So let's see here. Which stuff? So who made it? So it says the Holy Quran or Bible was made by the original man, who is Allah, the supreme being, black man of Asia. So we've got this concept of the Quran or the Torah or whatever else being written in etheric form before it ever comes into physical existence. And Judaism, hold on a second. Judaism explicitly places that dating at 2,000 years before creation, and we went through to some extent what is within those dates. And one thing that should immediately stand out here says, all right, so the Quran will expire in the year 25,000, 9,080 years from the date of this writing. Okay, so let's do some math. All right, so as far as the 1 to 40 goes, this is in 1934. And it's saying that it will expire 9,080 years from this date, which would put us something like this. So 11,014 CE. Okay, so you're gonna see some different dates as we do this, and there's some rhyme and reason behind that, and we want to explore to make sure we understand exactly why that is. So the first thing right off top we want to look at is that we got something pointing at 11 and we got something pointing at 14. Okay, so in the previous lesson in the 1 to 14, 11 dealt with word being bond. Okay. And remember the 11th letter, king, way back when, that had to do with, the king's word is life. So it's the same idea of word is bond. As far as the 14th degree goes, remember that was all about the girls training. So the women and girls training. All right. So we got something having to do with keeping our word. Word is bond. And the training of the woman. So right off rip, with the themes that we've already kind of talked about, you see that this has some kind of correlation with a vibratory connection to the feminine. And as you'll see, it says that the planet Earth, which is the home of Islam, is approximately 25,000 miles in circumference. So the wise man of the East, the black man, makes his history to equal his home in circumference, a year to every mile. So the circumference, so we're talking about the measurement, the word, the vibration, the cycle, the oscillation of the planet, the feminine aspect. We related this to King. Word is born. Both here now or in. Now is the time to get knowledge of self or end up in a pit of ignorance. Nation is the united Asiatic people, dark and light. Okay, so we got some duality going on in there. So just put that in your back pocket. 11 and 14 is 25. So keep that in mind. Because we keep talking about this 25,000 year cycle. So when we get to the 25th degree, we will revisit that. But in terms of things that you have that are valued at 25, we have the letter Y, which we refer to as Y, like the question. But we also said that it deals with the Y chromosome. All right, so then let's look at this. We're gonna do some checking with that. But the other thing I want to bring to your attention is this idea of he renews it for another 25,000 years. So you have a circumference of the planet, and the planet is rotating, and therefore it's basically saying it's just like a year. So the equivalent of I'll take that back. The equivalent of a day. So a rotation of, so if we can make a math problem that says 25,000 miles equals 1 day. So we'll say approximately, because that's what it says in the list. Equals 1 day. Okay, so literally every 25,000 miles, you renew your history. So when you so what happens when you go through your day is that your brain is constantly making neural connections. So that's the connections of neurons in your brain. These connections as you gain information, and then they have these dendrils, these branches that kind of reach out. They grow, if you will, and extend themselves as you collect more information throughout the day. Then when you go to sleep at night and you're getting your proper rest, those dendrils, they then retract. And so your brain starts to move that information over into long-term memory. So it starts to store it. And then how it does that is that the electrical signals that you have produced in order to, gather that information, it is converted into corresponding chemical signals. And so it basically stores that information in a chemical form. All right. So the chemical stays there, and whenever you act upon said chemicals, it allows you to be able to recall said information. So the information doesn't necessarily have to be active all the time. It becomes dormant, and you impress upon that chemical information in order to re-access the electrical field associated with that particular set of information, and then it projects to you in your mind. Okay. So as far as that goes, this idea of recording history, renewing history, it makes sense on the functional level of how our mind and our brain work. But there's a little more to it to that. All right. And I think it would be a value of us to go ahead and move on to the second degree with respect to it. And we're going to look at these two at the same time. All right. So first degree deals with the knowledge. We were dealing with the man with the Y chromosome. All right. Now the second degree, it asks, what is the circumference of the planet Earth? So we were just talking about the correlation between time and the circumference. The answer that we give is 24,896 miles in circumference. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and see if this is a literal measure or is there something a little bit more, built into them. So let's go over here to the laptop and let me ask, what is the circumference of the Earth? Okay, so the official amount given is 24,901 miles. Okay, so we got 24,901 miles on the official record, which is a difference of 5. All right, that's your 5%ers right there, but there's a 5 difference there. All right, so what is really being communicated here? So it's 5 miles is not a bad margin of error for 1934. That's pretty freaking nice. And it goes on to say that because the planet is an oblate spheroid, bulging at the equator and flattened at the poles, the meridional pole to pole circumference is slightly smaller, measuring approximately 24,860 miles. So it's actually not all the same circumference. All right, so let's find out the difference there. So you got 860. So on that end, it's 36 lower. And we know the significance of 36, the 36 meridians of the body. Okay. When you draw one of these stars right here, the size of these interior angles is 36 degrees. All right. So there's a lot of significance to 36. So all in all, we have like a range of 41. Culture as knowledge. All right, so that doesn't have any immediate significance to our situation just yet. But it does beg the question, given that range, let's find out where is the Earth exactly 24,896 miles in circumference. And just to let you know, I don't know that right off top. I'm discovering this as you are discovering this. And that's one of the fun parts about doing this. All right. So where on the planet is the circumference (24,896 miles? Let's see what it can give us. My daughter says that. Let's see. See, they're already they're like, oh, okay, that's what the 5% nation and Nation of Islam use for the actual facts. Okay, but it says if we use the scientific model of the Earth as an oblate spheroid, a circumference of exactly 24,896 miles occurs approximately at 1.1 degree north of south latitude. Let's play around with that a little bit. So 1.1 degree north of south latitude, whatever the hell that means. See, it's trying to get all these actual facts and stuff like it. They ain't tell you to do all that. What lies at that latitude? Let's see. North or south says well, I'll be dipped. often marking political boundaries of sitting near major cities. This latitude is less than 80 miles north of the equator. Notable locations along this line include much of the southern border of Equatorial Guinea with Gabon is defined by the first parallel north. Now let's look at the south parallel just to give a. So we got Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Major cities. Nairobi is nearby, passes through Lake Victoria. They mention Singapore up here. But these particular regions, if you have been watching my videos for a while, especially in the past lecture series of the 19 code, you know that Gabon in particular and Uganda, all of this right here is Congo Kingdom. And it's been very central to all of my talks. So even within the lesson, like I did not know before I just did this with you that this was gonna come up and it was gonna pop up like this. And in fact, this morning, that 1-1 dealing with 11 has been coming up a whole lot too with regards to Rudra. And I'll tell you why. So Rudra is pretty much the oldest god on the planet. So like it's a storm god who appears in the Rig Vedas on in the Hindu Vedas, and he is the one. So originally Shiva, or Shiva, just depending on how you spell it. So originally this is just a epithet that basically means like to be kind or auspicious and good. Okay. And that was used to describe Rudra. So depending on the story that you get, you'll get something about there being 11 Rudras or there's one Rudra. But essentially what that is the star Sirius. Isis is also associated with the star Sirius. All right. And you know, Sirius is very, very central to the teachings of the Egyptians and the Dogon, the famous Dogon tribe of Mali. All right. And Rudra is essentially a storm god. So a lot of the qualities that ended up becoming like, that got absorbed into Yahweh were, associated with Rudra. So Yahweh is essentially just another name. All right. For the same concept, same entity. Now, the most interesting thing about this is that Shiva is actually a very common word. Different forms of it are common within Bantu language. So Congo Kingdom is a Bantu kingdom for the most part. All right. And it's very common in Bantu words, and particularly in it all hovers about this same realm of meanings or whatever, but then it is explicitly kind and auspicious in some of them. And in fact, there is a Bantu tribe that is associated that got absorbed by the same Fong Bantu that we've been talking about in my past lectures, whose name is actually the Shiva tribe. So we have a tribe, we literally have a tribe of Shiva in Africa that is Bantu. And in this region, we talking about general, like, especially toward like Gabon. So they live in Gabon. All right. And so the closest thing that you are going to get to real live Wakanda, like once you learn the history of this particular area right in here, that's Wakanda. We are the Wakandans. The tribe of Shabazz, tribe of Christ, we are the inspiration for the Wakandans. I'm telling you, you can take that with a grain of salt. But I'm telling you, I'm telling you, that's what this stuff is getting at. All right, now let's get to the real juicy thing. So here's the thing that I caught when that I shared with Divine Master. Okay, so the lesson goes out of its way to say approximately 25,000 miles in circumference. And then in the degree after that, it specifies 24,896. So we got the 25 here, which we associated with the Y chromosome, and then now we got where the X chromosome is. So right on the equator, we're associating that with the male, but then this differential of 1.1 degrees, we're associating with the X chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA. Okay. The difference here is 104 miles. Now, you can look at this a couple of ways if you just want to play around with something. Where 10-4 in Arabic corresponds to the letters Ya, Da, and that is the source. It has to do with the hand. Hand distribution, the distribution of hands, Elohim. It has to, that is the root for Judah, and therefore the root for Judea, Judah, Jews, whatever else. So we're talking about the masculine lineage and the feminine lineage. In fact, we know we're talking about genetics because let's see if they done changed something since the last time I looked at this, because they're weird on Google. How many genes do humans have? All right, so they put it in the range of around 20,000 protein coding genes. That number, they've gotten it up to around at least 21,306. So you can see that these numbers, they're still discovering them, still figuring it out. Here, it even goes to say human genome contain between 20,000 to 25,000. Incidentally, that 20 to 25,000 years ago is exactly when they date the Shango bone, which was found on the border of Uganda, so in the Congo Kingdom. Realm that later became Congo Kingdom. Earliest advanced mathematics discovered 20, 25,000 years ago. And it's been very central to my talks as well. All right. And so clearly we've got a strange situation where time is echoing our structure of our genes and our DNA. This is because time operates on 4D, but genetics operates on, it's a 5D projection. All right. So if you understand how to read the genetics, you can overcome a lot of the failings of trying to read time. So because of how history is recorded by people, if you only have one perspective, you're only going to give one narrative of history. If you want to confirm whose history is accurate and whose is not, especially when it comes to these people right here or whatever, you need to look at the genetic record. And because that is the projector. So it's a holographic. You have a holographic existence. Every single one of your cells has the same DNA within it. They're all being manifested from the same one picture that's in that DNA and just in one cell. You started off as a single cell, multiplied into the body you are today. All right, and you went from something that's a flat 2D cell to something that is turned that base into a 3D structure, which is a pyramid with 5 points. Okay. But the point is, you look at like Israel right now that has made it illegal to get a DNA test because they don't want anybody knowing what the real timeline is, so that they can claim some sort of superiority. All right, but anyways, so we got this difference, this 104. Now the other place where this ends up being significant is, make sure I'm not getting too far ahead of myself, because I think we covered enough dates to do what I'm about to do. And we covered the dates that were found in the veggies in the 1 to 14. I believe so. Give me just a moment. I believe so. Like, if I'm being completely honest, I think we've got the full dates. All right, so remember, so before we had a rough start date of around 13,086 BC for year 1 of the Asiatic calendar. So we had something like 13. So we've had 13,000, and at the highest we end up getting 13,086. Part of the significance of that is that halfway, that's BCE. So BC. Okay, now part of the significance of it hidden right there is that half of a 25,000 year cycle places you at 586 BCE, which is when they said Jerusalem was captured and the Temple of Solomon fell. So that's a very important date. So the very midpoint of our 25,000 year calendar falls right here. Now, let's look at something. So we have this 104 to play around with, right? Okay. So let's look at that. So what happens if, so we said approximately 104. All right, so the other end, so the farthest date out that you get with the lessons comes out to around 11,915. Like if I'm applying it here, because we don't have a year 0, it's gonna get me to about right here, CE. Okay. Now, there's some interesting stuff that happens with this, because if I account, so this is where it gets me with 25,000. So if I convert this number alphanumerically, I can get the word. So A is 1, S is 19, 1 is A, 5 is E. All right, and then I want to show you real quick what that word means. I normally have my already open, my Wiktionary, because you know we like to go to the Wiktionary. Let me show you real fast what that word means. I know some of y'all are already looking at how similar that is to Ashe, the energy, life force, and all of that. But being right and exact, archaic form of Ara. Okay, so right off top, this has to do with to be dry, to burn, to glow, hearth, and ashes. Okay, and so remember that the etymology for both, so for Sirius, the etymology has to do with the scorcher, so the burning, and the word black itself, coming from Proto-Indo-European bel, B-H-E-L, also has to do with to burn, to shine. Okay, so there is some relationship between these two things, but it says that this is a archaic form of Ara, which means altar or sanctuary / refuge. All right, so the Congo, the mountains of the moon, and we've talked about how that etymology for Sinai is connected to mountain of the moon, Mount Ruwindi, I think it's called in that native language. Mountain of the Moon in Central Africa, in the same region that these degrees we're talking about, that 1.1 degree and all of that, Uganda near there and all of that stuff. They were in what was called refugia because of the ice age changing and the flooding and all of that. They were basically isolated in these regions for a very, very long time, enough time for some tall savanna dwelling peoples to develop into pygmies. So, which means that their skin got slightly lighter. They had a tone more similar to mine, instead of like the deep black that you get on the Nile. And they became shorter because it allows you to be able to eat less, be able to move through the dense forest a little better. Like it was just an adaptation that made sense. They're on average between 4'11" and 5'1". Okay, and so all this is happening in here, and what I really want you to look at is what happens when we account for that 104 differential. So when we subtract that out, we get 11811. What does that spell? 1 is A, 18 is R, and 11 is K. That's right. Both Noah's Ark and the Ark of the Covenant. Because we talked about how the 3 items that are contained in the Ark of the Covenant are a reference to the motif of the sun, moon, and star. All right. So yes, this is a hidden key about the Ark right here in the first degree of these 120 lessons. So this tells you right there is a relationship associated with that distance at 1.1 degree distance. It's telling you that this is the region where the Ark is likely held. You know, they have a replica of the Ark held in Ethiopia. And originally, Ethiopia was considered everything below the equator. So right in this region. So they right in our 120 lessons. Like if you're just taking this stuff literally and not knowing exactly what it's talking about. But furthermore, this is also saying that the Ark has an association with your genetics. So the sun is our Y, where we get our Y from. And so quick theosophy lesson, because that stuff is a lot more accurate than it seems on the surface, because, you know, Nazis and everybody else got hold of it and corrupted it. But with the original stuff that Blavatsky brought up. All right, so first and foremost, both the Atlanteans and the root race that came behind them, the Aryans, both originated in West and Central Africa. Okay, so region is probably closer to where like the Fon Bantu were originally, is where Atlantis, aka Kusha, emerged from, and then the Aryans, they emerged near where the Akan and the Ashanti and all of them are today, where the Adinkra symbols come from. Okay, and so then, you know, civilization spreads, they go through various sub races, and then the next generation. So everybody on the planet right now is considered Aryan. The Aryans are descendants of the Atlanteans. Depending on how much you look like me right here, that determines whether how much of your Atlantean that you still have. If you are darker than me, you have more of your Lemurian still in place. So Lemuria was before Atlantis. Okay, and so those are our birthmarks for you to be able to tell. Okay, but my reddish tone is associated with Atlantis. All right, and so Atlantis was known esoterically as Kusha. Kusha or Kushite, Kushi is another word that is used interchangeably with Ethiopian. Like I said, Ethiopia was everything beneath the equator. And there it is. So Atlantis was not lost. It was isolated and named Ethiopia in that particular case. So if you need more evidence regarding that, I have talked about it in countless talks up to this point, and we want to move on. But then now you know the location of the arc and why it's there, and it is all in that first degree and second degree if you use those in tandem. So this is the power of what's going on with these lessons. Now let's move on to the third. So we talked about the diameter of the planet. We talked about the circumference. Now let's talk about the diameter. All right, so the diameter is given as 7. So let me read the question properly. It says, what is the diameter of the planet Earth? Answer, 7,296 miles. Okay, so once again, let's go over here to the lapping top and then find out what is the on paper. Now, one of the things that I want to really drive home for you with regards to looking at the quote unquote exact values that they give, you know, in academia, is that in their pursuit of a more accurate measurement, going several decimal points and so on and so forth, what they fail to realize is that the ancient people used the numbers as an alphanumeric key for language and hidden mnemonics and symbolism and stuff. So whereas, like, for instance, if I take the golden ratio out to, let's say, 5 digits, I can make that alphanumerically Afro. So A is 1, 6 is F, 18 is R, 0 O. But I could also stop it at 3, and that'll give me Alpha, which is an African divination system. So the information that is condensed within it is layered. Okay. And I could go even further, because the next letters are that 3-3, which is that Berber word we talked about. So now I'm not even just talking about Africa. I know I'm talking specifically about where the Berbers were. And then the Berbers were in that early Aryan territory and Libya, aka Put, aka Foot. Bantu, with those particular letter transformations that we know take place, is related to Pontu, Panchaea, which was another name for Atlantis. It's related to Punt, Put, all of that stuff. So don't let the surface understanding of the biblical narrative confuse you. It's in there. All of this is in there. What's the real reason that the devil calls you African? Because he knows something about you that you don't. Because he was up there with them Greeks. He went over there and raided those pyramids in Egypt. All right, so anyways, the diameter of the planet Earth, 7,926 miles. All right, so let's find out what the given diameter is. What is the diameter of the Earth? So pretty much the exact same thing. So this one is one that you could take to the bank as straight up literal, but we also have the differential to where when you get closer to the poles, it's something more like 7,898. Okay, so let's see what that comes out to. So 14 and 10, 6. All right, so that's going to give me a 6, a 9, a 3, and a 1. All right, now, if you don't know the significance of the number 396, I don't even know what to do with you. I don't know what to do with your life. All right, but our first degree, so this is pointed back to our first degree. And remember that we talked about the equator and we talked about the genes. All right. So the first syllable, so this corresponds to the letter A, which is Allah. Arm, leg, arm, head. All right. So your resonance of your body, when you send sound to your belt, which on your body is where your navel is, so solar plexus. When you send that syllable right there to that area, you are able to you're able to create a standing wave in order to be able to send vibration through your whole body when you complete the circuit through Om. So the chanting of Om. So the syllable Om itself means vanity. And this is a word that is used, was it Jeremiah? I want to say, I forget. He was describing Israel and the state that they had gone into. So that this was a secret message given here. However, when you actually understand that the word Om is actually 3 syllables and a nasalization, so that little dot that sounds like, it's like a nasalization, so it's really like a called a turia. All right, but this is supposed to hit the navel. That's supposed to allow the sound, like you hold the sound, and as your mouth is closing, it gradually develops into a ooh sound. So, so by the time you close the mouth, and so when you do it properly, you can feel the vibration move from your navel to the center of your chest to your throat. That's you creating a standing wave in the body. If you know how to hold that standing wave, then you can redirect it up into the skull using nasalization. Okay, and then that vibrates the pineal gland. and the entire third eye axis. So the third eye is not just the pineal gland. It's all that stuff that's in the middle of it, of your brain. So that's like your hippocampus. It's the thalamus. It's all of that. It's an axis. And so when you vibrate that central axis of the brain, it entrains the two halves. So the hippocampus itself is in two different halves. You got one half that's in one hemisphere of the brain, and it controls verbal mapping. And then you've got the other half of it in the other hemisphere of the brain that governs spatial mapping. So in other words, we've got a situation where part of our brain takes the same information and maps it based on words. And then on the other side of the brain, it maps it based on space. So that tells you, your brain design tells you that these two things are inexplicably linked. All right. And then by you entraining your brain, by getting the two hemispheres of the brain to work together through vibration, it is no longer vanity. And then AUM actually means realization. So all those Eastern practices are always talking about realization, to become realized and all this. Realization is the knowledge of self. So there is knowledge of self in terms of this system and, memorizing degrees and whatnot. But once you become wise to what's actually going on, what the actions are, and bringing those two things together to your understanding to form a clear picture, you get that 3, 9, 6. That's a way of drawing the Ohm symbol. All right. So all of that's right here in these lessons, man. Now, the other significant factor here is that, remember, I've told you in the past that pi is the relationship of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. So we've got a circumference that we're talking about is 24,896, and then we're talking about a diameter of 7,296. So we got that 96 appearing in both cases. Okay. All right. And so there's some congruency with that. Born adds equality. So manifest from mental to physical. Adding equality, which is to be equal in everything, in all aspects of life. Now, this bisects this circle. So I'm only dealing with half of that. And so half of this number, let's do some old school math like this. All right, there's 1, there's a 2, that's a 4. 2 goes into 9 4 times, leaves 1 behind, so that's into 16, so that's 8. Okay, so half of that is 12, 4, 4, 8 right there. All right. I don't want to break that down too far, so I can already see what that 4, 4, that's Jed and everything else, but we don't want to get that deep into it. But I could break that down again. So if I wanted to compare this to the Yoa that's in the Congo, I can divide this into fourths and then cut that one more time. So that's going to give me, let's see, 6, 2, 2, 4. All right, so each one of these regions would be 6,224 miles. And if you want to play with that at some point, you can do that on your own time. All right, but case in point, when we're dealing with the diameter and the circumference, we get that top half of the circle, and then that's the Egyptian hieroglyph for mass or matter or whatever. So it's telling you how matter is brought into being from mental to physical. So it's all very congruent with what we've been discussing. All right, now so that covers the first three. So let me go ahead and clean up a little bit. But that's just just to give you an idea of the type of exploration that happens when you continue to study your lessons, but then you get plus degrees, learn some other stuff, and see how it relates back to it. And then your if you just come in trying to believe in something, it's easy for you to just accept the lessons face value. But the more that you actually question and the more that you explore what the rest of the world is saying, what the rest of history is saying, what the rest of the math and everything else is saying, it enriches your knowledge. And so everything that you're looking at should work that same way. Like with the Bible, if you the more that you learn about other religions, the more that you realize that a lot of the same things are being said. But then you can start looking at the history and see why it evolved the way it did from one hand to another as it changed hands. All right. So moving on, number 4, we have covered this. Number 4 is, what is the total square mileage of the planet Earth? And we said the answer was 196,940,000 square miles. All right. And then we when we confronted that in the 1 to 14, or was it in the in the 1 to 10, when we confronted that originally, we found that was a pretty exact measurement. That was one that you could take literal. All right. And so something somewhat interesting that happens here is that whereas this appeared as the 5th degree previously, it is now the 4th degree. So this same value which I said we could break down into the 40th degree, the 9th, the 6th, and the 19th. All right, in that previous one, we talked about that. This value, I went ahead and I multiplied that out to give you the 114, which is the number of surahs in the Quran, and the number of nadis that a person who has achieved a level of Shiva activates. If I did the same thing here and I multiplied 9 times 40, that's 360. Okay, so 1/2 of 360 degrees of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Knowledge, wisdom, understanding. So I got 3 circles. So if I take one of those circles and I make that my equator, I take one of those circles and I make that my prime meridian. And then I use another circle to get that other degree. It's a 3D object. I put it around here. I have a globe. And in fact, now I've got volume. I've got length, width, and height, and can therefore get the information I need in order to calculate the surface area, which is this. So this is embedded in the degree itself. Now the significance of it being the 4th here and the 5th here, remember we were just talking about that 4D is time, history, so the rotation of the physical earth, and at 5D we're talking about projection and genetics. In the past, I've talked about how the number 4 when they were creating the numeral system, it originally looked like this. It looked like the letter Tet. All right, so the ninth letter, Tet, was original. Well, hold on, I'll take that back. All right, so Tet was a circle with the cross in, and then 4 is just the cross. Whereas Akash, number 0, was the circle by itself. So in other words, this is showing you an equation of how these things came together as a symbol. All right, so that was Tet, and it meant like completion. It also represented a serpent in a basket, so a standing wave. So you putting the standing wave in a basket here. All right, and I talked about how what we associate with the number 4 was originally how the number 5 looked. So that was originally 5 because it's supposed to represent a hand. It's the Egyptian hieroglyph for the hand. Used to have it like this at one point. There's different ways they've drawn it. But the point is, a hand has 5 fingers, which is why it makes sense for a hand hieroglyph to be the symbol for it. But they decided that this would instead become 4, and then 5 would look like this instead. Okay? It used to be like this. It made sense because you go 1, 2, 3, 4. But they decided they want that to be 4, and then this became what you associate with 5. Okay? This is living mathematics, y'all. Speaking of 5, the 5th degree, the question says, what is the total square mileage of land and the total square mileage of water on the planet Earth? Okay, so once again, 4 and 5 are working together. All right, so of that, so let me put that up here. So of that 196,940,000 miles, number 5 now breaks that down into land. It says land is 255,000 miles. Water is 139,685,000 miles. Okay. I can already see some interesting stuff leaping out right there. So we've got the ratio of land and water. All right, and let's make sure that adds up to what we wanted to add up to. 10, 4, 9, 6, 9, 1. Okay, the math is airtight. All right, now, just like we parse this up, I can get me a good 9 here, 6th degree, a 8th degree, a 5th degree, like this. I can get me some, if I wanted, I can get me some 5, some 25, some 7, all of this right here if I wanted to. Now, I could go ahead and tell you that the significance of this 255, in addition to spelling B-E-E. So, line 8 of Pascal's triangle, which I commonly reference, the total there is 256, which is the Odoifa. So the quantum computing system. So Odoifa basically means it's basically related to the because it's like a container for knowledge. So it's basically the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant is Odoifa, and they got a word, I believe it's I can't remember how the accents are, but it's a roko that obviously are, and it comes from, you know, a common root, if you will, and I believe I want to say that's how it was, or it was one of them. I forget what the accents were on there, but yeah, that's a concept associated with creating symbols in order to preserve knowledge. So it's telling you that the three things that are found in the Ark of the Covenant are representative of specific qualities. The symbols that come together to give you full knowledge. All right, so the significance of the 255 in reference to that is that this is line 8, and so the sum of the remaining 7 lines of the triangle, the total of all of that is 255. So, and then it just so happens that lines 0 through 7, so it's a total of 8. So EFA, if you don't know anything about EFA, it is like a binary code of, it's 8-bit binary code, if you will. Okay, and so we've got 8 lines up here. And so these 7 lines total that 255 that we find here. We got our 7 showing up. 5 has relevance with respect to the 5 numbers that appear on the spine of this. So the spine of Pascal's triangle is, of course, 1, 2, 6, 20, 70. In Hebrew gematria, that corresponds to a left, which transliterates to like an E. This transliterates to a B, which is bet. This is Vav, which transliterates to O. This is Kaf, which is a K, and then Ayin, which is an A. So that's Iboga. That is specifically Iboga plant that's used in Central Africa, in Gabon, the same place we've been talking about. But the Fong language in particular has a lot of similarities to both Canaanite and the Semitic languages. It is unique from the other. It is a Bantu language, but it is unique in that quality, and it is very likely how they got their languages, because this Fong, I've shown previously how it is very likely tied to the Egyptian Fong, from which they say the Phoenicians, they get their name from. And so the Phoenicians, they're considered Canaanites, but the name means something like carpenter, which is the same as the Nagar and Tectone words that are used to describe Jesus's application. So we back to this tribe of Christ concept. And it talks about them being forest dwellers, which is also a epithet used for the Igbo and the Pygmies themselves. And so you see this nexus. This Iboga plant is what they use during their ceremonies in order to be able to access the information of the spine, and so on and so forth. All right, so we've got some of that information. So we would expect, to open this up. So we've already talked about how this relates to the 114 90s, but now we're opening up the body, understanding this. Just for the record, I've talked about this in my previous lecture series as well, that the total of these right here is 99, which is transliterated in Arabic to Yata. It means using the palm to measure out 8. Okay, and so that's what we're talking about here. So these 8 lines 0 through 7. So Yata, and then Garasu is the other half of that word, meaning crow or to call, and essentially having the same meaning as Rudra, where it comes from, like roar, to call. But this is also tied to the same linguistic chain that we get Christ from. All right. So more and more and more is pointing to the origins of what became the story of Christ, pointing to this area. Now, I briefly mentioned in the past, this individual is Simeon Toko. If you don't know who he is yet, you need to go ahead and look him up, because on April 20th, the dude from Ancient Aliens, David Wilcox, died from apparent suicide. But then he also said in the interview, when he was talking about this guy, aka Black Jesus, he said that he was told not to print it or he would be killed, and he is now gone. So take that as you will. But Simeon Toko, this man that, them colonizers, they came in, he was born in 1918, so he grew up through the 20s and the 30s and the 40s of World Wars, and didn't leave until 1984. And this man, they said they would come and they would shoot him up, cut him up, whatever else, and he would regenerate on some Deadpool stuff. And then he, at one point, in order to fend off the Belgian, armies and the colonizers there in Central Africa, so he was in Angola, but in Angola, his people moved into that region from, equatorial, so not too far, but it was just that the Congo Kingdom, like the way it was divided up or whatever else when it ended later on, that's where his people were. But he is very much part of that same, lineage. But anyways, they said that he summoned angels that helped, fight. I think they said some thousands. I don't remember how many they said, but that came to fight off these Belgians. But it's a unique description from what you usually hear with regards to angels, because they said that they were basically dwarf-like and extremely strong. So these were like extremely strong pygmies or dwarves. And then you have stories like this everywhere, like all the way out to Japan. And I was looking specifically at the Altai Sand Mountains. Yeah, so that's the actual word, sand. And in Central Asia, and they also had stories of these black dwarves or whatever that used to live near them, and the role they played, and teaching them and different stuff like this. So this is not just something that's isolated to just what I'm talking about, nor what one of these African groups are talking about. Like, this is a phenomenon that definitely needs to be looked at, and in respect to our greater conversation of who and what we are. All right, and so 57, do we want to do a confirmation? Y'all want to do that? Let's go ahead and do it. So what's the total? What is the total square mileage? Total land in square miles on Earth. Yeah, so 57 point. So they're doing between 57 to 57.5. So that is pretty accurate. So 57.255, and then it's really no point in checking the other, because if they got that as the land or whatever, that's naturally gonna subtract out to the remaining. All right, so interestingly, here this 13 coming out. Remember, the 13th letter of Hebrew is Mem, which means water. So it's interesting that that's popping up at the beginning of a conversation about water. You got the 85%, so that's the majority there. Here's another interesting occurrence right here. Okay, so 139,685,000. If this is the 85%, so we'll get into that later about the 85% who are still blind, deaf, and dumb. But we get this 1,396 again that we just had just a minute ago. So that's self-referential. So that meant that our last degree where we managed to derive this 1,396 difference is showing up again in the next degree. So they testing you. They trying to show you if you on the right track or not. All right, this is happening right before your eyes, people. These lessons are a calculator in and of themselves. All right, so we're halfway there. I got about half hour to get through these last 5. All right. Let me clean up the board a little bit. I'll give you some stuff, man. And then I'm discovering, I'll be looking up something I'm not even thinking about is going to have anything to do with the lessons of today. But then once I think about the degrees I got to go through, I'll be like, you know what? They do actually say something that coordinates with this, and this is how you know it must be rooted somewhere in the truth. All right, number 6, equality degree. It asks, what is the total weight of the planet Earth? So now we're looking at the weight. How much mass? How much is? Answer: 6 sextillion tons, a unit, followed by 21 ciphers. Ooh, there's some science in that. All right. A unit followed by 21 ciphers. So that's a number with 21 zeros behind it. That means that the number itself has 22 total digits. There are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet plus 5 final letters, which are alternative versions of 5 of these that are used only at the end of words. So that gives you a total of 27. Okay. And if we split it up, it's saying, so we got 6 sextillion tons. So our first digit is the 6, and then it's talking about the 21 ciphers. All right. And we've had these come up to some degree, but then talked about Wa and Shin. I reverse that. That's pretty much She-Wa. So that comes up again. So she was back. So that's the same people in that same region. But this 216 should also interest you too, because that times 10, 2160, is both the number of degrees in a cube and it's the diameter of the moon. And then Shiva is intimately associated with the moon. So he wears that crescent on his head in one of his key depictions. All right. And I think we may or may not have talked about what Washi actually means in Sanskrit. And you can see I've already looked it up here. Well, they got it in Japanese as a Something having to do with some damn paper. But it's so washi vashi. So you know how that the W and the V they interchange. Um it means control, mastery in the self. So self mastery. I self Lord and Master is what my why so this is essentially pointing to this right here. All right, now there's something else I was about to bring to that. Oh, yeah. Okay, so also bearing in mind, just that interchange I just said about how the wah va, how that note, how that sound interchanges between those languages. It's the same way. So between the letters U, V, and W, there's a lot of interchange when you go from language to language. So you have to be careful of that. And by this being either focusing on the 21 letters versus the 22 that you get from including that first digit, that brings your attention to that. Also, 6 plus 21 add up to that same 27 that we're talking about here. There are 27 stars that are important in Vedic astrology. The 28th was Krishna himself, who descended to earth. So you've got the man, and then you've got the 27 stars. So these are what he has to work with, these alphabets. And Krishna is also the embodiment of Om, so that we were talking about before. And he is this star that came to earth is Vega, the falling eagle, aka the descending eagle, the Shabazz. The descending eagle. And then this is a reference to the fact that as you move south along the African continent, the star Vega, which was the pole star at the beginning of, so both at the beginning and the end of this period that I just pointed out, from BC to CE. So Vega is the pole star at both of these points. So clearly our teachings are very much tied to the star Vega, which is located in the Lyra constellation, between Orion and Taurus. It's over there, between Cygnus and Taurus. And then Taurus is often considered a symbol for the child. So Heru, Horus. Okay. And so Krishna is tied up in all that too. They say Krishna was born, they say he was born under the sign of Taurus, but then because of how my own, like I'm born right at the crossing point of Christmas, and it's like they always tie Krishna to Christ. Well, I was born like right when the prime meridian crosses into Christmas, and then the markings on my hand are in almost like exact mesh. I wish I had. How can I bring up the picture? It's on my phone, so I can't really bring it up right here. But I mapped out how my lines. You see how they split, how my heart line splits at the top into that V. That's basically like if you look at the constellation Taurus. That's what. No, I can at least show you that much. Hold up. I can at least show you that I ain't bullshitting. Taurus constellation. Okay, so you see how I think this is a real good one. I got all that stuff on my hand. Okay, so all right, so if you look at that and then you look at my hand, all right, so you see how my V the best way to look at this would be to make my heart line and my V go into my fingers, and then my two fingers be the two sides of Taurus right here, like that. And what you'll also see, let me see if I can zoom in on it. But you should be able to see where. Look at my hand. So it is very. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's vague, but you can kind of see. All right, so right there. So in this region, right. I can't do this with two hands. All right, so you'll see, like when I get closer to it, you'll see in this region right here, you'll see like a V that comes out like an upside down V. Right. Let's see if I can catch it. Where did I just see? Yeah, right there, light right there. So at the end of what's that? My lifeline or headline. But you can see it. Matter of fact, let me color them in so you can see it. All right, so I got these lines that come down just like this right here. Right there. Okay, so that makes the Taurus picture, like it makes it a little more obvious right there. Okay, so those two light lines I have that are connecting to my main lines right there is Taurus. All right, so this is exactly what the night sky looked like when I was born. And so even though the Vedic teachings, they say that Krishna was born under the sign of Taurus, I think what it meant was he was literally physically born while Taurus was positioned in the sky like that or whatever, because that's normal for that time of year or whatever. So if we associating Krishna with Christ and all these figures with the same tribe and stuff, then it would make sense that it would have a similar sort of profile. And so oftentimes what you'll see is that human avatars of Krishna in the story are the ones who work hard and end up achieving the level of Shiva. So they become a Shivata. And so they are the equivalent of Shiva on earth or whatever. So they are of the quality of goodness and auspiciousness and kindness associated with the epithet Shiva. All right, so we are Krishna avatars. We're avatar descendants. It's not falling eagle, or they say swooping eagle, but it's talking about descendants. So the word avatar means to descend. Okay, descendants. All right, still got a couple more to do. All right, number 7. And then 28 days in the moon cycle. That's 4 weeks. 27 is also 9 times 3, so 999. All right, number 7. How fast does our planet travel? 1,037 and 1/3 mile per hour. Just so we can have that even, so that means in 3 hours we have, let's see, 1037 times 3, 21, 9, and then 11. What am I doing? Hold on. 7 times 3, 21, 9, that's 11, boop. Then, yeah, that's 0. Bring down a 1, that's 3, 1, 1. And then we add one more to it because we got that 1/3 on there. And so that gives us this right here. All right, so now that's interesting. Why? Because that is exactly 1/8 of that 24,896 circumference we were talking about. That is exactly 1/8. So it forms this. Krishna is intimately associated with this symbol because that is the Dharma wheel. That is your duty. And so that 19 that showed up in the surface area goes to the 19th degree, which you'll see the next time I get on here for part 2 or whatever about the duty of a civilized person. And I talked about that intimately with regards to the 19 code. All right, so once again, this stuff is definitely aligning with that. So those 8 phases of the moon, because this, remember, this is the equator, and so the moon is phase locked. It always faces the equator as it rotates around. So for whatever reason, this right here is drawing your attention to that same relationship. We keep on dealing with the moon. They originally thought the Shango bone was simply to track the moon, but there's a lot more going on with it. The story of the tribe of Shabazz, it says that we were originally on a moon, and that moon was divided in 2, and then one half of that became the earth and the other half became what we call the moon today. I will just tell you about that 2,160. That was the diameter of the moon. So this is some moon science, y'all. But it's all about the relationship with the moon. What is your relationship with your woman? You got to understand your relationship with your woman. All right, do y'all want to do a confirmation? Do y'all want to find out how fast the Earth travels according to the eggheads? How fast does... So we're going to say Earth travel first, and then we're going to ask about rotate to see exactly what they mean. All right, so they saying... Ooh, look at that. 66,600 miles per hour. We talking about miles per hour. They banging that 666 hard, huh? Around the sun. But we really want to talk about how fast it's traveling around its axis. Travel around its axis. All right, so that's a little closer to what we're talking about. So they estimated it, they cut it off to 1,040 miles per hour. But we got the exact figure of 1,037 and a third. Now, that significance of it specifically talking about that 37 and that third, I've previously talked about how that relationship between 37 and 3 gives you that 111, which is associated with that first letter, Aleph, which is the equivalent to our A, which means Allah. And it associates with a bull or ox, because we talked about Ephraim. Ephraim is fruit of Islam, the fruit of mathematics, the fruit of life that emerges from the tree of life pattern has exactly 13 circles in it. And you can use this pattern to be able to make all of the platonic solids. So the tetrahedron, the cube, and you basically make a specific 2D projections of these geometries, and it helps to activate your pattern recognition software in your Pineal, because I was able to unlock all kind of stuff once I learned how to draw the tree of life and the flower of life and fruit of life, all that good stuff. And so essentially what this is 13 circles each of which has a little. So it is set. The structure itself has a 6-point structure, but each one of these circles also has that 6, and so that tells you it's holographic. So we got that number 6 that's still operating in here. And so if this is Vav, the 6th letter is Vav, and the 13th letter is Mem, that's Om. Okay. So Om, the purpose of Om, who Krishna is the embodiment of, is that it is one frequency that contains all the frequencies. It's the Holy Spirit in the sense of one spirit that contains all the other spirits. And so this is the primordial sound from which all other things emerge. All right, so even in frequency form, Allah is the basis for, all things in that regard. Okay? Everything's built on that template, that frequential template. Om is also considered the embodiment of the golden ratio. So the reason you shape like a star is because the golden ratio and the 5-point star are intimately associated with each other. It's called a pentagram. So penta, punta, which also has to do with point. Bonta, Banta, Bantu. That's why the Bantu say that they have sky ancestors. They descend from sky gods. This is Akashic gods. Invocation from the Akasha. Invoked from space. Not outer space, inner space. Dun dun dun. We come out of the vacuum itself. Anywhere. Manifest. That's why we come in through little behind cells. Come in, we enter through a little cell and then multiply. Because we come in, because we drop below Planck scale when we die, which is itself associated with fire. Planck scale is roughly 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35, I want to say. So it's 36 digits. Okay, so it's just proportion. It's just a matter of scaling up into reality. All right, 8. This is one of the heaviest ones. It's one of the heaviest degrees. Not just for this group, just period. All right. So it asks, what makes rain, hail, snow, and earthquakes? Pay attention. So we kept on getting things that were pointing to 8. So that's build or destroy. You adding on to life or you taking away from life. All depending on your duty, your dharma, depending on how much friction you given in terms of resistance to your karma. Well, not necessarily karma. Karma is your action, but your dharma is your mission. It's your destiny. It's your duty. Our duty is to teach the knowledge of self to those who don't know, to teach the civilized. That is our duty. All right. And so the answer, what makes rain, hail, snow, and earthquakes? The earth is approximately covered under water, approximately 3/4 of its surface. The sun and moon have attracting powers over our planet while it is traveling at terrific speed of 1,037 1/3 miles per hour on its way around the sun. The sun draws this water up into the earth's rotation, which is called gravitation, into a fine mist that the naked eye can hardly detect. As this mist ascends higher and higher, increasing with other mists of water in different currents of the atmosphere until it becomes heavier than gravitation, then it distills back to the earth, to the planet, in the forms of drops of water or drops of ice, which depends on how heavy the mist was and the layer of current that it was in. For there are some layers of currents that are real cold and warm, and some which are very swift and changeable. When this mist strikes a cold current, it becomes solid ice in small round drops in form or a light, small round drops in form, or a light fluffy form, which is called snow. But this mist is never drawn above 6 miles of the Earth's surface. The reason that it rains back on the planet is because it cannot get out of the Earth's atmosphere with its high speed of rotating around the sun. That makes this impossible. Earthquakes are caused by the Son of Man experimenting in high explosives. In fact, all above is caused by the Son of Man. And mind you, Son is being spelled S-U-N. All right. Okay, let's dig into that. All right, so it's pretty I want to break out. I can't even break out a calculator right this second. We wanted to look at that proportion between the land and the water real quick, but we pretty much can, we know that the Earth is approximately 3/4 of its surface covered in water, but it talks about gravitation in terms of the rotation of the Earth and the behavior of the sun. Let's see, the gravitation of the sun and moon, which we've been dealing with, the behavior of the sun and moon and drawing that water up into the atmosphere. Now, maybe not super recent, but recent enough, all things considered. Scientists are starting to, well, some people are starting to accept the idea that the way things actually work with respect to gravitation is based on centrifuge. So the spinning of the Earth itself, it generates two different forces. It gives you centrifugal and centripetal. So centrifuge is what draws something up. So it's what causes things to move outward as it spins. So this is what helps to keep the Earth from collapsing in on its own self toward its core. Simultaneously, as it's pushing outward, it's also pulling inward. So the axis at the center of the Earth is pulling inward while the outside of it is pushing outward. And so it is actually that centripetal force, that counter force, that holds us to the ground, more or less. Keeps us from just flying off into the atmosphere. So you got these two things happening at once. Okay, and so it's talking about how these waters are drawn up into the atmosphere. And remember, the Earth is your woman, so this is the mother. And so the way this was taught to me related the currents to the emotions of the woman. And how when those emotions are drawn up, it depends on to what level, to what frequency these emotions are drawn up. It determines what you're going to get as a result. Are you going to get a nice flurry of snow? Or are you going to get a nice summer rain? Or are you going to get a torrent, a flood? Are you going to get a storm? All of that is wrapped up in this particular degree. Now, it talks about not rising above 6 miles from the Earth's surface. This is a direct reference to what we talked about in justice, where the difference between just icy equality versus just ice, or being frozen, stuck in or at 32 degrees. We talked about that, right? Now, one thing that I discovered, I'm going to show you something. We cannot rise above 32 degrees in that scenario. What is located at 32 degrees north latitude? Let's see what kind of stuff is located along that latitude line. Let's see, passes near San Diego, some Tucson, cross through the south, so Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, all of that. It crosses exactly through Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Egypt. This north of Cairo. Then it passes through Iraq, near Baghdad, Iran, who we have, conflict with right now, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and China. Defines part of the border between New Mexico and Texas. Passes through the Arabian Peninsula, North African deserts. Now, just for comparison, let's see what happens when we rise above it. We end up getting Los Angeles, the Angels. We get Phoenix, the one who rises again. Atlanta, Atlantis. Casablanca, White House. Shanghai, Shang Dynasty, Shango Bone, Shango the lightning god. So all of those themes. So you can't get to those themes in your head until you rise above Nagasaki. 33 degree Nagasaki. That's where they dropped the atomic bomb. And do you know where they got the uranium that was necessary in order to create that atomic bomb? They got it from the equator in Africa, Uganda, where the Congo Kingdom and all that was at. Then they kept it secret. They told people that they were getting their uranium from Canada. They kept it secret because they didn't want the Axis powers, the Nazis and them, to get their hands on it. Secret civilization where they're getting a rare, powerful element. Sound familiar? Wakanda. Yes, Uganda is Wakanda. That's where the word comes from. If you know a little bit about Bantu, and then the transformations between G and K that occur between Afro-Asiatic and Indo-European languages, then yes, Wakanda is definitely, at least spiritually, resonant name-wise, Bantu-wise with Uganda, where they got this uranium, which is code for vibranium, because once again, that 6 degree just showed you the interchange between the U and the V, right? And then we pronounce that V like a wa. Waka, Vega. So Uganda, Wakanda, Vega, all of that is related to each other. Then the abode of Vishnu in the direction of Capricorn, which appears on the horizon when you head it toward the equator, is called Vaikunta. So we got these words: Uganda, Wakanda, Vaikunta, Vega. All of these words are related to each other. So Vega, it works with Altair. So the quote unquote falling eagle and the rising eagle form a line with each other. So in the summer triangle that's formed by Vega, Altair, and the Neb, it points downward and directs you toward Capricorn, which is my birth sign, which is on the horizon, and that is where the abode of Vishnu is said to be located. So all of this stuff, that they got in India, and they talk about the Vedas or whatever else, it was very much present in Bantu culture a while before. Now, in fact, the first time that the epithet Shiva is mentioned is in the Rig Veda. So that's the first of the Vedas that all the Hindu culture is based on. A few hundred, just a couple hundred, not even that long before, but definitely before that, that's when they say the Proto-Bantu language emerged. So for that word, that Shiva word, to show up in various forms throughout the various Bantu languages or whatever, means that it was part of the original language that they all came from. And so that was right before. So there's a strong possibility that Rudra, having to do with Sirius, which is important in the African mystery schools, is a strong possibility that that was inherited by the Hindus from Africa. Right? They like to keep it separate. They like to try to say ain't got none of that stuff has anything to do with each other, and nobody had contact with each other. But I just say it like this: them folk over there, especially in the south of India, are not that black by accident. All right. And so let's deal with this. Earthquakes are caused by the Son of Man experimenting in high explosives. Didn't I just say that they dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, which is right on this line? Did I not just say this? Okay, and they spell Son of Man like a sun in the sky. They are talking about a man-made sun. In my previous lecture series, I talk all about Oppenheimer and the timing of the creation of the atomic bomb and the Trinity tests and what happened with the discovery of the Nag Hammadi libraries and what happened with the Roswell crash. I did that. So if you didn't see that lecture series, make sure you go back and watch that. But that is what it's talking about right here. So it may sound like a crazy set of claims inside of these lessons, but I guarantee you, in my dealing with these 120 lessons, I have found real world scenarios that are a lot of details filled in once you got these lessons. Now let's move on to number 9. Okay, so the 9th degree is, why does the devil teach that a mystery God brings all this? So you got what you're taught, and then you got what I'm teaching now. Let's see what the answer says. It says, to conceal the true and living God, who is the Son of Man, and to make slaves out of the 85% by keeping him blind, worshiping something he knows they cannot see, invisible. He makes himself rich from their labor. The 85% knows that it rains, hail, snows, and also hear thunder above their heads, but they do not bother to find out who is causing all of this to happen. By not letting the 5% teach them, they believe in the 10% on face value. So just to give you some statistics, so the thread, the genetic thread, so we know we talk about genetics, the genetic thread that ties us to Japan is the DE lineages. So the DE male haplogroup lineages, earlier it told you that they had approximately 25,000 that it mentioned was talking about the Y chromosome. So this is it. All right, so this DE started out on the African continent. D and E split. D went out of the continent and then went to Tibet, just like they said Shiva did at Kailash, which means crystal, but it's Kailash mountain in the Himalayas. Then it continued on into Japan for the indigenous Ainu people. Okay? And Japan was originally known as Wa, meaning dwarf. All right? You have stories that they tell of Jesus having been in Tibet, as well as let's see, it was Tibet, Egypt, and India. The other place that they went, I forgot, was the Andaman Islands. So the Andamans off of the coast of South India. Let me show you what the Andaman Islanders look like real quick. Cause you know what you typically think that an Indian person looks like, right? Or a Hindu person looks like, right? Let me show you what an Andaman Islander looks like. Andaman. I just put people, they know who I'm talking about. Let me show you real quick. Look at here, boy. Look at here. Yeah. You know somebody on your block right now who kind of look like it. Well, look at these people. The old DB right there. He in the Andaman Islands somewhere. Look at these folks. But look at B to B. That is curly hair. So yeah. So from coast to coast, all the way out to Japan. Okay, they spread out, and so they try to say that they call these negritos, but they try to say that they are not the same thing as the Central African pygmies. But then they blew that wide open in 2021 when they discovered these lineages in Nigeria among Yoruba, Esan, so that's like the Benin Empire and stuff, and some Igbo. All right, and so but the vast majority of us are of the E haplogroup, so that's very prevalent, and then it spread specifically due to the Bantu migrations. So the Bantu migrations were largely to be able to bring these bloodlines together to unify the dark people and have us plugged into this tribe of Christ lineage. All right, and so they want to conceal. So we got the 85% who are blind, deaf, and dumb, who don't know the truth of who they are. They believe the 10% on face value. So if they're 85%, that leaves 15%. And of that 15%, it is divided into the 10% and the 5%, who we get into in the next few degrees I'll be doing in the next video. But both of these know, they got the knowledge of self. And there's a genetic component to that, because we have what's called YAP plus ALU insertion. So there are a set of, I think it's around 300 base pairs that were inserted into our DNA that highly improved our cognitive ability and our ability to filter information in reality. All right, so you hear those stories about the Anunnaki and so on and so forth. They say that it's a microbe called A. luteus, so you can Google that if you want to, that puts these genes, so this was long time ago, and this is a stable feature of our DNA now. But there's a gut bacteria that we have that's called H. pylori that remains dormant unless it is activated, and it's like a system that connects to what was inserted by the A. luteus or whatever. So that was probably the craziest thing that I discovered, because it sounds like the midichlorians in Star Wars, right? Like where later on they tell you that the Force comes from them having these microbes. So in other words, George Lucas, it wasn't just an accident that he called them Jedi, and you got the Jed pillar in Egypt, but he was also tapping into this situation with the midichlorians. Now I want to show you something. So let me see if I can get this Yatagarasu symbol. Okay, there you go. So you got the three-legged crow. So this is the Yatagarasu secret society in Japan. So that's our shamanic lineage that is in Japan or whatever. So those are our relatives right there. Our distant relatives. They're part of that D line. We part of the E line. Now, I want you to pay attention to the shape of this. The shape of this right here, and then I'm gonna bring up on Star Wars. Star Wars. Let me see. I think it's a rebel symbol in it. So the rebel symbol. Ooh. Ooh. Hold up. Let's go back. Ooh. Ooh. The rebel line. Ooh. If y'all big on that New Age stuff where they talk about how you had a resistance in Orion, they basically say that, or like anything that they talk about with Orion and Orion Empire, if you into that sort of thing, they say that's basically what Star Wars is based on. And then you had the people who rebelled against them. They say that's what the rebellion on Star Wars is about. And those are the ones that were banished to the destroyed planet Maldic. When Maldic got destroyed, those souls are said to have incarnated over here on Earth and whatever else. Once again, you don't have to believe any of it. I'm just saying that there's the story that they're telling, and the more we go through these lessons, the weirder it gets that it aligns with these stories that these people are telling. Like even with the 23 scientists plus one that came later, you have the book Only Planet of Choice, and let me bring up the cover of that real quick, because there were channeling sessions that took place in the 70s with which Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, he participated in that, and they released a book in 1983, and it was those channeling sessions that inspired Star Trek greatly. And in this book they talk about 24 ET races that contributed to the creation of mankind. Once again, you don't have to believe any of it, but what happens with channelers is they're actually tapping into the information of the planet, but depending on their own vocabulary and their capacity for language, it determines how they interpret what comes through on the channel. And so if you have no real exposure to Bantu languages or basically anything black, you're going to default to the stuff that you know from your culture. And so they were getting the same, very similar information about 24 races or whatever else that was similar to what we teach regarding the 23 scientists plus one who came later. But then we also know that it has to do with a genetic component. So a lot of the things that they're pointing to and looking at as an external type of force, this is what the mystery god situation is. This looking for some kind of external cause, because we have electricity at the center of our essence, center of our spine and whatever else. We're connected to the total network. So a large part of what those phenomena is a projection of the information that is inside of us. So essentially, through knowing these lessons and this information, it's allowing you to figure out mathematically how to read it. All right. And so of those 15% who have that, 10% keep that information for themselves, and they use it to get rich and fat off the ignorance of these. Whereas the 5% are us, with the poor righteous teachers. They're trying to help the 85 stop destroying their power. So build or destroy power. So stop them from destroying their power. Okay. And last but not least, before I get out of here, because I got to get out of here within the next 15 minutes, the 10th degree. So we brought up the mystery god. The point is not saying that there isn't a God. It's just saying God isn't a mystery. There are mystery schools who are designed to conceal and protect knowledge, but there is no mystery if you know who God is. Knowledge itself. So number 10, and this is where we'll stop. Who is that mystery God? There is no mystery God. The Son of Man have searched for that mystery God for trillions of years and were unable to find this so-called mystery God. So they have agreed that the only God is the Son of Man. So they lost no time searching for that which does not exist. All right. So in other words, they were like, where is this mystery God you speak of? I don't know. And they search and they search. They said trillions of years. So that means even before the third density matrix was created. So this form of reality has only been around 4 billion years. But the actions that allowed this universe to take place in a 3D format trillions of years. All right. And then so Son of Man search. Okay, so earlier I said the idea of the man-made sun. All right, so you can take that to mean something external you build as a form of technology to make a bomb, or there's the sun that you build through your solar plexus. So the same concept of resonance that I talked about earlier with Ohm is what they use in order to understand the vector equilibrium that was necessary in order to get the necessary reactions that Oppenheimer needed in order to create the atomic bomb. All right, during the Trinity test. Okay, so the same science that is within you can be weaponized in order to make bombs. It can make nuclear energy. That same nuclear energy could be used to power homes and you wouldn't have no electric bill. But instead of that, they rather spend all of your tax dollars on going to war with other people who haven't even really attacked. They trying to stop their nuclear programs before they could even have a nuclear program. And they might have just been using it to power their homes or whatever. But then they got you thinking that they pose a real threat. Like we're supposed to be the greatest military in the world, and we way the fuck over here. So that doesn't mean, you don't be on your P's and Q's, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, as long as you defending your borders and whatever else, there's people, you have allies that live closer to these folks. They don't feel threatened. I mean, but when you are always picking on everybody else, then you always sitting around paranoid that somebody coming for you. I mean, it's understandable. No judgment on my part. But one thing I will say is that the mystery, the whole point of the initiation system, the whole point of gurus and all of that is to intentionally keep on stringing you along until you get it in your head that you don't need them. They will tell you straight up, I am no closer to God than you are. We are the same distance. If you turn and you look within, you'll see that divine spark. Now, we ain't talking about your ego, but the more your ego is aligned with your divine purpose, the more that quote unquote God shines through. So there's no mystery as to who it is, but then the true mystery is you figuring out what aspects of you express God in general and which aspects of you are your unique perspective on what we all are at the end of the day. So I'm gonna just let you stew and marinate on that for a little bit so I can get ready to go get my daughter. But in the next one, in episode 10, I will be going through numbers 11 through 20 of the 1 to 40, y'all. On that note, I'm gonna say peace. Oh, before I go, make sure y'all get y'all behinds out there and check out One Spoon of Chocolate by my man's The RZA. One spoon of chocolate. distributed it himself. He wrote it and directed it himself, or whatever. Why is this important to you? If you got anything to do with me, you know I run with Woo, and this ain't just about repping the banner or something. But as hip hoppers, the music portion of it has largely become pop. And one of our favorite aspects of hip hop, if you grew up in that era, was the concept of sampling, because the whole idea is that you're repurposing bits, giving it new life. You're resurrecting it. And when they take that out of your hands, when they make it too expensive to be able to do the one thing, we didn't have instruments in the hood. They took all our music programs. So we figured out how to turn the record player itself into an instrument. So it's an indigenous creation, but that they ended up commercializing and everything else. Well, the new iteration of that is movies. And RZA talks about this in his interview with Josh Johnson on the Daily Show recently, where what you're doing, and Tarantino, like a lot of my favorite directors, like a lot of folks do this, even listening to Ryan Coogler when he was talking about how they put together Sinners, you become a library for, you watch a lot of movies and stuff, and you pick up the stuff that you think is cool and that you like, and you find ways to repurpose that stuff. And so when you make your own movies, you find ways to incorporate it without it necessarily being like straight up copying. This recontextualization of things. Hamlet by William Shakespeare, that's the Lion King and the first Black Panther movie. Black Panther and the Lion King, both properties of Disney, are Hamlet. But you didn't pay attention to Hamlet in school, which is why you would have never made the connection otherwise. But this is what I'm talking about. With stuff like this, you get that opportunity. So go out, support my man's RZA, and I guarantee you part of the reason that I'm doing all of this in the first place is because I do intend on doing more production in the near future in the arena of film. We are pulling together our Gifford Historical Museum and Cultural Center so that we have places for performance and production, to be able to do a bunch of stuff in-house, be able to do plays and all that. We ain't just doing that for our health. I know people who know people. And I know people who know themselves because they got the knowledge of stuff. And if you're going to do business with anybody, I'm trying to be like Jizza, who don't need a contract because he's kept his word for decades at this point. What he said he was going to do, that's what he's still doing. Word is bond. Period. Get you one spoon of chocolate. I'm out of here. In theaters today. Peace.